Hail, and welcome back to Elder Futhark Rune Divination 101. Today we are going to be discussing Ehwaz, the rune of momentum, the horse rune. Yeah, I have a lot to talk about with this rune. I have a lot of personal experiences with this rune that I have integrated, decided to use as material for this video, as always is the case with a lot of these initiatory events and happenings. So I would suggest we get started right away. Ehwaz, it is the rune, as I said, of momentum, of the horse. It is therefore also the rune of speed, and it literally means horse. It is the 19th rune in the Elder Futhark, and thus the third rune in the third and final 8. The modern day letter equivalent is E, as in elder or ending. Associated astrological sign is Gemini. It is therefore an air rune, just like Gemini is an air sign. It is associated with the element air. The associated gods are Frey and Freya, according to many people, because of the interconnectivity, because Ehwaz very much deals with bonds, with marital and friendship bondings, communication, stuff like that. It has to do in many ways with sexuality, with stuff like that, which is why Frey and Freya are often perceived to be gods that are associated with it. I personally also would like to add Sleipnir, Odin's eight-legged horse, of course, to that, because Sleipnir is, well, a horse with 8 legs, of course, and it is a rune of speed, it is a rune of momentum, and Ehwaz is also a rune of communication with the higher aspects of ourselves to the physical aspect of ourselves. And in many ways, if you look at the myths, which, again, in case you haven't watched my other videos, I would like to reiterate here, I tend to not take the myths at face value. I don't, take them for what they are. But I do think that there are a lot of hidden things locked away in these myths. And of course, they are tampered with. Because for various reasons, tampering by the Christians who wrote the Eddas in Iceland, of course. Yeah, I do very much believe that Sleipnir, in the sense in its relation to in his relation to Ehwaz, in their relation to Ehwaz as the rune is very much about communication and bridging gaps. Because that's what Odin, of course, does with Sleipnir. He rides him on his quests across the 9 worlds to try to find information and wisdom and stuff like that. And that is in many ways what Ehwaz is about: information, communication, in a very different way than Ansus is, in a different way than Kanaz is, as an enlightener or a light bearer bringer. Ansus is, of course, divine inspiration, creativity, stuff like that. But Ehwaz is the active element of communication of these things and the relaying of such information in different aspects, in different ways. So, as I said, the rune Ehwaz is very much about connections, about bonds, about the bonds of friendship, about the bonds of marriage partners, brothers and sisters. Again, here we see the relation to Frey and Freya. They are, of course, siblings, twins, I believe. One's own mind, one's body, the interconnectivity between these things. If the body suffers, the mind suffers. If the mind suffers, the body suffers. And of course, in Manas, we will expound upon that even further, where we integrate all aspects of ourselves, and we learn to understand ourselves as human beings, which is why this rune comes before Manas, because it is in a way, completion of the knowledge of self, and of course the knowledge of humanity as a whole. But anyway, that is of course for Manas, but it does have a relation to it. It's very interesting, of course, to know that Ehwaz, when you look at it, it is in essence a Manas rune without without 2 staves, or parts of a stave, if you will. Because in Manas, it looks essentially like a Ehwaz with a Dagas in there, or alternatively You know, you could use some other shapes that you might see in there, but um, that is very interesting to me because sometimes I look at the shapes of runes, and when you first start off with the runes, you don't really make those connections all that consciously, but there is very much a reason of why certain runes are shaped certain ways. It is because they speak to our unconscious minds in different manners, and if you are being initiated into the runes, you will have certain things done to you, uh, damage done to you, sacrifices that you need to make, which is of course related to Odin sacrificing his eye. Many people depict Odin as a one-eyed god, but personally, I very strongly believe that what Odin sacrificed to gain wisdom was his third eye. And the reason why I say that is because I personally have had to do that for the past 500 years. I have had what was known as a crown of insanity. I made a bargain, as I mentioned in August, the rune on August that I made, with the Gutic, Goetic, or whatever you want to call it, however you want to pronounce it, demon Agarus, in my past life 500 years ago, in a past life. I've had many lives since, apparently. But I made a deal with this being. Agarus knows languages. So the Elder Futhark was something I apparently wanted to learn. I was a being who was relatively high up the social hierarchy in the 1500s, and probably therefore had more resources to, obviously access stuff like this, like arcane, magical, occult information and knowledge than a, person of lower born status, even though I, hate to say that, use those terms, but, um, you know, basically it is something that I made a bargain on how to learn the Elder Futhark. I had to write another contract well, what I can only describe as an imp, really, and this imp became my quote-unquote familiar. But this familiar also built what I can only describe as what I can only describe as an energetic construct around my third eye. This was even before I directly figured it out, told to me by another shaman. Um, it was called the Crown of Insanity by them. And it was built around my third eye, which means that my third eye was for a very long time, um, for a very large portion, blocked. I would occasionally get glimpses of stuff. I would occasionally see people get into accidents, and when they walked out the door, 2 hours later, I'd get phone calls. They got into an accident, stuff like that. Which of course I didn't know to warn them of, because I was just like, what the fuck is this image, but stuff like that would actually happen, and uh, a lot of the time I didn't see stuff, no matter how hard I tried, and eventually I met someone who actually helped me to, who became a good friend of mine, and they actually, helped me to quote unquote see and to unravel contracts that I made all these lifetimes ago. And I do see a higher force, because the runes, as I have discussed here many times on this channel, they're not just magical symbols. They are representations of universal forces, which means that they are beyond Odin, they are beyond Agarus, they are beyond a lot of deities. I mean, Odin may have retrieved the runes from the quote-unquote abyss, or from the chasm, as they sometimes say, as we read in the Eddas. But I very strongly believe that Odin, with his sacrifices, he basically had to, sacrifice in many different ways to acquire wisdom, to acquire the runes, to acquire a lot of different things. Now, of course, the Eddas talk about the younger Futhark, the Scandinavian Futhark, because it talks about 18 runes, and the Elder Futhark, of course, has 24. But the concept remains the same, because I believe very strongly that these myths that are recorded date back to the earlier areas of when the Elder Futhark was more prevalent, shall we say. So in a way, I too sacrificed an eye, just like Odin did, and this contraption, which caused a lot of things in combination with a lot of other spirits that were negatively affecting me, that were attached to me from various religious backgrounds across lifetimes, actually, as I talk about in my Excarnation of the Lamb, or Excarnating the Lamb, excuse me, series. But part of the reason that I developed a lot of mental illnesses, such as obsessive compulsive disorder, social anxiety, extreme depression, paranoia, all those kinds of things, was because of this contraption in my head, this energetic construct, if you will, that basically was programmed to constantly harass me and like do stuff like that. And here again, I'm seeing this principle of energy, of like healing starts in the spiritual. Excuse me, healing starts in the spiritual, as the shamanic path dictates. You know, so I'm finding cures and stuff like that for mental illnesses that are actually due to spiritual actions, that are due to spiritual consequences, spiritual beings that are causing negative side effects. So we're seeing this, or I'm seeing this at least very strongly. And it's very funny to me because one of my primary initiatory illnesses, my, well, shamanic illness, if you will, because that's, you know, part of the shamanic path, you have to cure a technically, supposedly incurable illness, you know, and that is, you cannot call yourself a, you know, a full shaman supposedly until you've cured yourself. So that's what I'm doing right now. But it is very interesting to me how all this stuff is very interconnected, and it was not until this rune, when I was meditating on it and writing the script on it and consulting the forces associated with it, that it just kind of, you know, just snapped, clicked into place, and I was like, wait a second. Odin has two ravens, Huygen and Moinen, or Hugin and Moonin, or however you pronounce it. My Old Norse is not the best on the planet. You'll have to forgive me. But yeah, Huygen and Moinen, thought and memory, and obsessive compulsive disorder. You keep asking the same questions over and over, because that's the kind of OCD I have, or, well, is finally receding now, but that's the kind of OCD that I was plagued with for the past 10 years, roughly, a little longer than that, actually. It slowly started up in the mid-teenage years, I would say. And that is, of course, something that is often reported. Again, I study psychology, so that is something that's often reported, where people start experiencing it in the teenage years. But basically, it started in my early to mid-teens, and it's, yeah, something that has built up over time, and it became gradually worse until I was completely crippled and housebound, and I basically, you know, attempted to, you know, take my life repeatedly. I wanted to, and it just didn't seem like I wanted to live, or that there was much point in living if my own brain was not even mine. And eventually I just went, you know what, the answers that secular science offers, they are not satisfactory to me, because I can strongly feel somehow, some way, some shape or form, there is a cure to this. So I started looking into the spiritual side of things. And sure enough, initially it became so bad that I just, you know, I was very much on the verge of you know, killing myself again. And they say that it gets worse before it gets better. Now, in my experience, that is because there are entities attached to you and a contract that they don't want you to find out about, because they get their food, they get their payments on a monthly basis, or, you know, it started to slowly unravel and make sense, and eventually we came to the point where I was literally, you know, when I was doing magical work with a friend of mine, we were literally visited by Odin, and he dropped a couple of contracts in my lap, and I was like, in, you know, the spiritual plane, as it were, during a journey, if you will. He was like, have your friend read this. And I was like, okay, because yeah, I couldn't use my third eye all that accurately. And I mean, I had a mentor at the time who kept pushing me like, yeah, no, you can use this, but I couldn't. I was literally unable to, because that was part of the contract. I read that contract, and my friend, who does not even, they are not initiated into the Elder Futhark. They are not on their way to becoming rune masters. They are not a shaman, although they do have their own very powerful path. But they're not walking this particular path, but they just grabbed a writing utensil and they started drawing out all these runes, which there were like 5, 6 runes on each page, and there were 12 pages of them. And as I looked all over them, I just saw in all these bind runes, because they ended up being bind runes, except the first page, which was just negative reverse runes, right? Or like mirrored runes or stuff like that. And that's partially how I know that mirrored runes are a thing. As I have discussed in my Bind Runes 101 video. But they basically started making sense as I was looking at them, and I was literally seeing like the runes programmed in such a manner that they were basically curses. They were basically curses that prevented me from having a happy life, that drew me to parents, or at least a parent or a caregiver, that would ruin my mental state. They were literally saying that I would have bad luck in love. They were literally saying that I would have bad luck in, sexual endeavors. That I would have all sorts of messed up stuff, that I would be poor, and that I would have this and that, and that I would have traumas inflicted and induced on me. And that was basically just 12 pages of like 5, 6 curses on every page. Of course, part of this was done to generate the payment to Ageris and the imp in question. But I have, as I discussed in August, since nullified this contract. So hopefully, if I incarnate another time, which I, may or may not do, depending on circumstances, um, I will likely not have these curses anymore, because I have solved this contract. I have gained the knowledge that I need over the past 500 years of the Elder Futhark, which, to me, 500 years, it's funny, because it almost seems that if you're being initiated into runic systems, you are emulating to a lesser extent the sacrifice that Odin made. Of course, he hung from the world tree Yggdrasil, from the highest branches, for 9 days and 9 nights. Now, if you are at all familiar with Christianity, you know that years and days are often used in a symbolic sense in the Bible. And I very strongly suspect, considering how this went for my own initiation, 500 years, I very strongly suspect that the 9 days and 9 nights that Odin hung from the world tree, as it were, it is, I think, a symbolism of a god maybe incarnating and learning lessons over maybe the span of 900 years, maybe. I don't know. It's a guess. It's a theory I have, but I very strongly suspect that those 9 days and 9 nights are not. They're not literal. I think that they are a metaphorical term used for a longer period of time than just 9 days and 9 nights. And that's a pretty huge sacrifice. So I think that Odin may have lived, and I really don't mean this to sound arrogant, because my sacrifice is the lesser. But I think that if you are being initiated into the runic systems and you want to become a rune master, that you are basically emulating Odin in that sense, in a very literal sense. You are having your eye stripped away, because where does Odin sacrifice his eye? He sacrifices it in the well of Urd. And that is, of course, the well of wisdom. And he sacrifices this because Mimir, the god who guards that well, who is later slain, and who Odin has his head. Of course, he carries it around with him or keeps it in his court or something, from the top of my head, I believe. And it speaks and it whispers things to him. It whispers and speaks counsel to him. So I think that in order to gain wisdom and knowledge, you have to deal with a being that requires you to sacrifice, which is what Agarus in my case was, or that imp more directly, that demon, if you will, was. It was a guardian of wisdom, a guardian of knowledge. I had to sacrifice my eye, my third eye. I couldn't use it properly. And finally, after dissolving the contract, after coming this far finally in the Elder Futhark, after all the experiences I gained, not only in this life, but also in the past 500 years, yeah, you're just basically going through an initiation. And in the third aid, we finally see in Burkano, the seeds are planted for healing, for regeneration. But it was in August, when I reached up to the Divine, that I finished the contract. And then we have Sowilo. It's victory. You know, it's a victory over something. You are assured of victory. So, in other words, after August, after you overcame the fear of what may be, what's happening, I don't know, after you reach up to the Divine and you connect with it and you see how things truly are, you have that victory, and then you progress into Ehwaz. You finally are starting to develop that courage and that justice and that law, and you understand the injustices that have been done to you, but you also understand that part of it is due to your own decisions, your own choices, which is of course where Perfro, the web of weird and stuff, comes into play, excuse me. And Burkano then starts the healing process, as I have very clearly seen. So that brings me to my next point. This imp, because Ehwaz also deals with the fetch. The fetch is another topic that I want to get into here, so I'm going to first describe to you very briefly what a fetch is. What a fetch is, depending on who you ask, a fetch can take the form of like an animal, or, I mean, you can take it from Irish mythology. It's like a doppelganger, you know. But the way I have learned it, the way I've been informed of it, is that your fetch is basically an opposite sex spirit that travels with you, who you can tap into to, you know, provide information to you regarding the opposite sex, if you wish to have insight into that. And part of the curses, as I mentioned, I have difficulty with sexual stuff, and I've had a lot of bad shit happen with that, and with romantic stuff, and all that sort of stuff. So eventually I'm studying Ehwaz, and I'm meditating on it, and I start trying to contact my fetch, and I start, you know, talking to her. And she's like this, you know, 1600, 1700 lady, a little older, but I find out she's completely batshit. She is completely driven insane. Yes, spirits can be insane. The imp that was attached to me was insane. Um, and he basically warped her and just harassed her in the same way that he harassed me. And I now have a fetch that is completely corrupted. So I had to approach Freya, and I asked Freya, can I please have another fetch to help heal this current fetch and to help heal myself, to remove all that nasty energy. And that is currently a work in process, in progress, excuse me. So it is quite ironic to me, because all my life I've had bad relationships, and spirit spouse that I talked about in my spirit spouses video. Now I understand why I was asked by certain deities to make a video on spirit spouses, because it kind of tied into the, because yes, I was asked to make a video on that. So I did, and it suddenly all started tying in together. Why did I have a negative spirit spouse? Why did I not, you know, have a nice one? Why did that succubus I was with back then fuck me up so bad? Why was she so incredibly claiming and excessively dominant, like unhealthily so? Why was she chasing away the women I was dating. Why did she even go so far as to attack any woman that came near me, even if they were just friends or family members? Yeah, I kid you not, it was that bad. Uh, why did my own mother treat me the way she did? So it all started making sense to me, and all this, everything to do basically with the opposite sex was just corrupted and fucked with to a point. And by the way, I do want to interject here. I've never been disloyal. I've never been a massive asshole to the women I've been with. I've never, cheated. I've never done any sort of thing that could have logically caused stuff like that. But I've had excessive misfortune with the opposite sex. So it is a interesting thing that I just found this out when I was meditating on this rune, because this communication between this fetch and myself, it has just been completely corrupted and warped and fucked with. So, if you have issues with this, that is something you may want to look into. How is your connection to your fetch? How is your connection to your, uh, to that particular person that, yeah, I'm also, by the way, not sure if everybody from every culture, from every tradition has the same kind of thing. I actually suspect that not every culture has the same kind of mechanic going on. So, meaning to say that I personally, as a Germanic individual, may have a fetch like this, but for example, if you were to go to the Irish or Celtic traditions, it may be, again, I am not sure because I'm not from that tradition, um, that your fetch may be something completely different and unrelated to this particular topic. I'm not quite sure on how this functions in the grand scheme of things, but this is my experience with what I have found out regarding the fetch for at least the Germanic / Norse tradition. So yeah, I consulted Freya again, like I said, and it's being worked on. And I was told that it may take up to 2 years to completely heal and reintegrate. In the meanwhile, I will have basically two fetches. One of them that is the corrupted, damaged, wounded one, if you will, and then a healthy lady will be established with me to assist me with that kind of stuff. So that is possible if your fetch is in some way, shape, or form corrupted. That does not necessarily have to be the end of your romantic life if you are a heterosexual individual. So it's yeah, it does not necessarily have to be the end. Uh, there are, from what I have been told, multiple ways actually in which you can heal your fetch, in which you can assist your fetch. Because keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, spirits are not invulnerable. They are not, as we are so often taught in Abrahamic traditions. We are spirits. We are just inhabiting a physical body. We can do damage to spirits. Spirits can do damage to us. It is just the way it works. It would be quite unfair if we were so low on the, cosmic totem pole because we are incarnated. It just doesn't work that way. However, if you have a contractual obligation to someone like I had, that harm that you could potentially cause could come right back at you for various reasons, which I won't be going into here. But this is something that you understand if you are a shamanic spirit worker, because that's kind of the area you deal in. Yeah, so this is something to keep in mind. Spirits can become corrupted. Spirits can become damaged. They can literally go insane. Um, they they have a quote unquote mental state just like we do, albeit in a bit more of a esoteric sense. They don't quite literally have, of course, a brain in the physical sense, but they do have personality and energy patterns that are flowing in a certain way that makes them who they are. And if that somehow becomes tainted or corrupted, it is technically then a illness, a spiritual illness, as it were. So that can be reversed in most cases. And there are various things that can happen to spirits. So yeah, that is something I wanted to pass along as a part of this rune, considering that it is in regards to communication and communication between the mind and the body, and the spirit and the mind, and the spirit and the body, and so on and so forth, and also communications between different individuals, including therefore your fetch, which can help you with your romantic life, with your romantic you know complications and issues. So yeah, again, that may be something that you may find interesting to look into. Anyway, so to move on to the more general meaning of what Ehwaz itself means, as in the rune itself, because of course I always do these little, as I said, you know, talks regarding the issues that I have personally been facing in regards to my initiation to the particular rune I'm discussing. But so Ehwaz itself, it is the bond of friendship. Like I said, it is the bond between marriage partners, brothers, sisters, your mind, your body, all things related to spiritual and even physical connection that we share with ourselves, that we share with other people, with other beings. Um, it is a rune of connection and communication in a very literal sense. Fun fact, the logo of Gmail is an Ehwaz. It's an Ehwaz over an envelope. Just take a look at it. It's the same rune. It's a little altered, but it is an Ehwaz. So it is they're basically invoking the rune of communication to provide good service for communication over email, over the internet. And by the way, I'm in no way, shape, or form working for Gmail or whatever. It's just a fun little tidbit of information I wanted you to yeah to observe, basically. So I mean, it's about, on that note, swiftly sending messages, because, back in the day when Ehwaz was more frequently used, a horse would have been the fastest method of transportation probably available to humankind. So a horse is something that a messenger would ride to swiftly, relay information and news and stuff like that. So it is swift communication, the sending of messages, communicating clearly and punctually. It is important. That is of course important for the success of endeavors. To have them come to fruition in a positive, healthy manner, in a manner in which you have desired the plan to be executed. Ehwaz is a bond between those that lead and follow, between horse and rider, or rider and horse, I should say, respectively, because the horse is in a way yielding to the rider, of course, but in turn, the horse must trust the rider, and if the horse does not trust the rider will not be able to control the steed. So it is a two-way dynamic, of course, and this can be applied in a workplace, for example, as well. The communication between a manager and an employee. You know, it can be a bond between for like a sergeant and like his squad that he is that he's working with, that he's leading with. So there we see again that dynamic of leader and follower, or officer and lower ranking soldier. So um, for example, it can be seen in a link between yourself and a close friend. That bond is almost unbreakable. It has to have some serious damage sustained to it to break that kind of bond. That is also the embodiment of Ehwaz. It is that very close knit connection again, like I said, between horse and rider. That the horse trusts the rider unconditionally, and the rider does the same in return to its horse. Otherwise, he would not, or she would not. Trust the horse with their life and with their speed and with their their assignment and whatever they may use the horse for. A close bond between siblings, such as Frey and Freya are good examples, as I mentioned earlier, of this. They are on opposite ends of the spectrum. They represent femininity and masculinity and stuff like that, but they are very much intertwined. They work together. They are not opposing forces, which is actually something that bothers me a lot about today's society, where it almost sometimes feels like male and female or masculine and feminine are seen as like opposing forces that need to be in conflict with one another, while in reality we should be using both aspects and integrating that in everybody, and work together to build a better society and better interconnective bonds between people. So it is that's something that I think is a very useful and important facet in modern day, at least U.S. culture. Back in my home country, fortunately, things are a little more balanced and egalitarian, I suppose. That is something I am not quite used to. How things work in the United States in relation to gender roles and the expectations of things. The dating game here is very frustrating to me because I'm just not used to um, women being very passive. In my country, the Netherlands, women tend to be a lot more straightforward about what they want and what they like. I mean, there's still a little bit of that element, but it's not nearly as much as it is here in the United States. And I'm not used to that. So would I personally love to see that changed? Yes, I would, because it is, in my opinion, very unhealthy for everybody involved. That this dating culture here is the way it is. But anyway, that is another aspect, facet of Ehwaz, if you will, that is important to utilize and harness as well. The interplay and the relationship between spouses, between marriage partners, and of course, this does not necessarily have to apply to heterosexual couples. It can, of course, also apply to homosexual couples. It does not necessarily have to be male or female. This is in this case, because that's what the traditions, saying Freya, masculine and feminine. But if you are homosexual, that is just as much applicable to your own love life as it is to someone who is not homosexual. So uh, that's something that you can keep in mind. It is the interconnectedness between partners and their communication, their bond, their strength, their union, their collaboration, and their the way they treat each other. Because you often see in couples that they become resentful after a time, and they start paying attention to all the negative and nasty, whining, conniving aspects of the other person, and it just becomes this built up, pent up frustration. And this is often very unhealthy and very toxic for a relationship, of course. And yeah, I can, of course, from personal experience, attest to that. That is something I've experienced, and it is not something nice. So, Ehwaz is in this also a great lesson and teaching in terms of communication between spouses. It's a very important thing, actually, that aspect of Ehwaz, which you may not originally suspect when you first delve into the meanings of this rune, because before I started actively meditating on it and before I actively started to dive into it, I always saw Ehwaz as a bit of a yeah, it's a rune of communication. It's the rune of speed. It's the rune of talking, of getting messages across. And so I would use it in my spells, and I would just put in there, I want this spell to work more swiftly. Add in a Ehwaz, stuff like that, or its relation to connections. Yeah, I put that in there, but it's not. Um, it's not been as clear and as vivid to me as when I started, meditating on this rune and being initiated into it. So yeah, keep that in mind. This rune is so much more than just the rune of speed, just the rune of momentum, and just the rune of the horse. It is a very multifaceted rune that belies both its simple appearance, I suppose, and also its surface meaning, I would say. And I mean, in this, all these things that we have discussed, all these bonds and this interconnectivity, it is a very suitable successor rune to Birkenau, because it deals with the life and death cycle of all things and its connectivity in that matter, the connectivity of existence in its entirety, because everything is on an energetic level connected. Because every action that we take affects everything else around us in some very indirect manner sometimes. I mean, you know, your actions of your ancestors 5,000 years ago, no matter how far back they are traced, if that ancestor had not made it with that particular person, your lineage would literally not be the way it is, and you would not have been here. Just one slight alteration to history, and you would not have been here. You know, so that's how far back that goes. That cycle of life and death, and that bond and that interconnectivity and that link between everything. It is a in that sense also very much tied to Perfro. So please keep that in mind when you are working with this rune. And it is therefore also important to note that when we neglect the lessons of Ehwaz, when we neglect the lessons of communication and establishing bonds, whether that be bonds of friendship, whether that be bonds of marriage or spouses or family members or anything, um, yeah, that's just what it is. If we fail, we're basically having a reverse or converse Ehwaz, as we will discuss later on. That is basically us not utilizing this energy. It is not being put to its full effect, or it is being misdirected, or it is being used for ill gain, if you will. So that's usually when our interpersonal relationships fail. And yeah, it does not necessarily have to be our fault, of course. But all we can do is make sure that we, from our end, um, establish and maintain that communication and that connection. It's very interesting because I actually resumed contact with my father, but I have recently cut off contact with my mother for various reasons. Relating to my past. I hadn't even quite made the connection until a few minutes ago, but I did that around the time that I was communicating, or that I was meditating, excuse me, on Ehwaz. And I think my subconscious just went like, this individual is very much a toxic individual, a very harmful individual. Now that you're, meditating and working with the essence of Ehwaz, which is communication in many different forms, you may want to cease communication sometimes with people who are just not that good for you, or who are just toxic or damaging to you. And that's exactly what I did. So, like I said, I hadn't even really made that connection until a couple minutes ago as I was thinking to myself on what to say next. But it just suddenly kind of made sense to me here. So, yeah, kind of had a little epiphany in the middle of recording this video. But so that's another facet to Ehwaz. Actually, now that I think about it, Ehwaz is also knowing when communication is a bad idea. Ehwaz is also knowing when a relationship of whatever form, whatever manner, um, you know, is meant to be cut off, or would be in your best interest to cut off. Because sometimes we shouldn't do our best to maintain communications, because that person may just be very toxic or harmful or hurtful to our well-being, even to our self-esteem, to our physical health, to our mental health, to a lot of things, really. Hell, maybe even our sexual health, if it is a maybe sexually abusive relationship. Um, so there are so many facets to this rune that are all related with this, to this particular energy, excuse me. Um, so, and at the same time, Ehwaz also says that sometimes bonds can be so strong that even not talking for a prolonged period of time, like I, for example, had with a good friend of mine who I am currently yeah, kind of a mentor to, who I'm teaching magic and stuff like that. Uh, when I first came to the United States, she and I quit talking for several months, and eventually we just resumed contact like it was yesterday that we had last talked, and we just kind of picked this up. And yeah, I mean, that to me displays this, um, this strength of communication, this bond of Ehwaz, this friendship, you know, that is a solid foundation that it's built upon, and therefore there are very few things that can, you know, break that kind of bond apart. So that is another thing that you may want to consider as well. That a lack of communication in certain situations does not necessarily have to mean that there's something wrong. Sometimes the distance between friends is great, and life just gets in the way. But if a friendship stands that kind of strain, you have a true friendship on which you can rely. So, you know, again, I have seen that kind of uh, energy at work in Ehwaz in that sense as well. So what that all comes down to, of course, is that trust with Ehwaz is a very important factor. It may, in fact, be one of the most important things related to Ehwaz, because without trust, in some way, shape, or form, relationships couldn't endure. They can't last, no matter what form that relationship takes. A marriage or a relationship in the romantic sense might fail because there may not be a mutual trust, or there may be a mutual distrust even. There may be a lack of respect for your spouse, or your spouse may have a lack of respect for you for whatever reason. This is, of course, why people shouldn't settle. This is, of course, why people shouldn't engage in relationships just because they're lonely, because it is a very selfish reason for engaging in a relationship. You're not actually doing it because you like the other person. You're just wanting to have your own needs fulfilled, which is understandable. But at the same time, it's not going to be a relationship that is mutually respectful and trusting and loving. So, I mean, a friendship will fail if you know, one doesn't trust one's friends. If you suspect that they might be gossiping about you behind your back, or like shit talking you or something like that. Um, I personally would not even want to be friends with people that I could not, you know, trust further than I could throw them. Basically, I mean, this rune is not about blind trust. Obviously, it is about, again, like I said, mutual trust that is built on a very solid foundation, that is built on a concrete establishment of the other person's personality matching with your own personality, and that flows smoothly. Now, it of course does not need to flow flawlessly, because that's where the communication comes in. Of course, it makes up the differences. It helps with ironing out differences. It helps with ironing out conflicts, maybe conflicts of interest, conflicts of personality in certain departments. I mean, hell, even my best friend and I, we don't agree on everything, you know. So yeah, we have fights. Hell, we've even gotten into physical altercations. All right, but they're still my best friend. So I mean, that sounds really strange to say, but yeah, it is what it is. You know. So I love them to death, and I know that they love me to death. So it's. I mean, they trusted me enough to let them into their house, and I trust them enough to, you know, not go back on their rental agreement that I've made with them, and you know, all that kind of stuff. So, uh, you know, these are all these factors of trust and of communication that are established quite organically, usually, that just happen over time, that just flow over time, and that just glue and bond together over time. And of course, these dynamics may be, you know, fluid or flexible, or they may remain relatively static over time. But that will depend on the situation, of course, and that does not necessarily mean one way or the other if it's wrong or right, because people's circumstances and personalities and all these other things, they are so varied that there is no right way to do things as long as it works for the both of you. And again, that harkens back to both romantic relations, sexual relations, familial ties, that harkens back to friendships, and all these interconnectivity, all these interconnected relationships, even between employee and employer, and again, all other forms of communication, even society as a whole, because society would not have come as far technologically, in terms of lawmaking, of philosophy. Religions wouldn't have been established, nations wouldn't have formed. We'd still be living in a tribal matter. Hell, even tribal ways of living would not be able to be maintained if there wasn't some form of communication between the tribe. So communication is so fucking important to human beings. Why are we the quote unquote apex predator on this planet? It's not because of our amazing physical strength or because we are, you know, faster or whatever than other species. There are plenty of species on this planet who are far stronger than we are and or far faster than we are. It's just we communicate, we work together in groups, we use our brains, and of course we have thumbs, which also helps, but that's not quite the point of what I'm saying here. But we work together as a cohesive unit, and that's what allows us as human beings to build the societies we have built. And this too is Ehwaz, this too is communication, this too is relaying of messages. So all these things, human society, and again, this is why I said that Manas is a very suitable successor rune, because it deals with humanity and you as a person. Um, it is an it is a great link that the two make, Ehwaz and Manas, and this is for a reason that the Ehwaz comes first, because humankind as a whole would not exist in the state it's in if Ehwaz's energy of communication wasn't a factor. So that is kind of most of what I wanted to say on Ehwaz as a general, in its general interpretation, the general energies behind it. And of course, lastly, before I forget, Ehwaz may actually refer to a literal vessel of transportation, a literal horse. So this is something we may get into later, maybe with the divination section. But if you do see Ehwaz appear in a divination, for example, that has to do with travel, and you see a cautionary rune, as it were, that relates to reverse Ehwaz, it may be that there are forces at work that may have interfered with your travel in some way, shape, or form, or that may very well interfere with your travel. And this could be anything from a blizzard grounding your plane, making you like a day late to where you're supposed to be. This could be literally that your brakes in your car are fucked. This could literally be all those sorts of things. It may be a breakdown of your transportation, or it could be the opposite, that your transportation is safe, or stuff like that. Your horse is fit for riding, as it were. So it may also relate to the more literal meaning of traveling, much like Raido. But yeah, that is kind of course, as always, up to the discretion of the individual doing the reading. So, Ehwaz is a fast-working rune all in all. It overcomes stagnation, it establishes bonds, it establishes connections, it is clear, fast, and honest communication. It allows the facilitation of compromising. That is also another very important thing that I do want to mention before I move on. Ehwaz is also a rune that you can and definitely should invoke, and whose energies you should harness. Maybe even in conjunction with Manas and Ansus, and maybe even Wunyo and Gabo, perhaps. because it's Gabo is the gift for a gift, which in some way deals with compromising, of course, as well. Um, Runes like that, you may want to work with those in conjunction with Ehwaz in order to facilitate compromises. And you want a compromise, if you use Ehwaz, to be as fair as possible to everyone involved. Now, of course, this varies because in, for example, a romantic relationship, if you are a monogamous person and the other person wants to have an open relationship, the compromise is unreachable. If you are really monogamous, you don't want to share your partner, period. So the other person cannot ask you for a compromise. So that's there is no compromise possible there. However, in more compromisable situations, where, for example, if you're a guy and you want to hang out with your buddies on Friday nights, and your spouse, for whatever reason, wants you to stay home and spend time with the kids on Friday night, there is a compromise that needs to be reached there. So that is a scenario where you could, invoke Ehwaz or use Ehwaz in some way, shape, or form, or the energies behind it at least, if you're not actually directly doing a spell or whatever, But I'm just throwing out suggestions here to illustrate or give you ideas on how to work with this. But if you want to reach a compromise effectively and you want to facilitate that compromise in a fair manner, you could say, okay, listen, on Friday nights, all my buddies are available, and I want to hang out with them on Fridays because then everybody's available, and I don't really want to change that. I do need my alone time. I do need my time away from you, which I recommend you do in a relationship, obviously, because it's healthy. Yeah, no, so, I mean, you could say, how about on Saturday afternoon, I spend time with the kids instead? And okay, so your spouse is happy, you're happy, you get to hang out with your friends, you get to spend time with your kids, stuff like that. So these are, simple, clear, and efficient matters in which you can utilize this kind of energy. So I think that kind of concludes the general gist of Ehwaz for the purpose of this video, and we will now be moving on to the divination portion. Ehwaz upright, what it means in divination, or what it can possibly mean in divination, because as always, this list is non-exhaustive. Ehwaz upright in divination can mean that whatever it is that you were inquiring about is moving along swiftly. It may move rapidly. Things will, if events continue in their present vein, of course, which is very important to know in divination. There are always outside factors that can alter the course of events, that things may reach a conclusion soon. And likely, if it's upright, it's going to be a likely, partially also depending on the surrounding runes, of course, that it may be a positive conclusion. So in matters of bonds, such as established in friendships, marriages, etc., it may be an indication that things are progressing well, either in a particular thing inquired about. For example, if you ask a question about a particular topic and Ehwaz shows up in the appropriate slot for this, things are progressing nicely. Or that things relating to that bond in particular, such as your friendship or your romantic relationship. Now, if it is a challenge rune, for example, if Ehwaz shows up as a challenge rune in your inquiry about your romantic relationship, that obviously means that you need to communicate more clearly, because that is a challenge posed to you. If you want to see better results from this, you need to improve your communications between the two of you, or however many people you're dating if you're not monogamous. So that is another aspect to this. It may indicate that you have a solid framework, network of friendships, of a strong tie to a particular family member or spouse or friend or whatever that you are inquiring about. It may indicate in that sense if there is an issue or trouble facing that particular bond, threatening that bond. If Ehwaz upright shows up, that means that there is a strong bond present, that bond will very likely endure the storm, as it were. Um, it will basically indicate that this bond is strong enough to last, that there is a good foundation for the friendship to fall back upon in times of crises, or whatever you want to call it. So Ehwaz may also, especially in conjunction with runes such as Anzus, which is of course the word, like the mouth, herald a message, news, usually of positive nature if they are both in their upright, in their upright ways, in their upright positions, excuse me. um, it may be a bringer of change in some way, shape, or form, because of course Ehwaz is momentum, it's movement. It is not a stagnant rune. And if the energies of Ehwaz are used in a conducive manner, of course this change may very well be for the better. So Ehwaz can also be a signifier for a need for change in communication between individuals. Again, if they are in the challenge slot, for example. In which case it can also imply that you are, in need of some talks with that particular person to discuss and, lay out your cards, your grievances, your issues with that particular person, or how things are going between the two of you. Now, when I say that, I of course am not saying that you should sit your ass down and, basically tie them to a chair, blindfold them, and put a spotlight over them and interrogate the fuck out of them. I'm saying just, sit down in a friendly atmosphere and just, like, talk about it and be like, hey, listen, you've been doing this and that, and this kind of bothers me for X, Y, Z reasons. And, that's basically what I'm referring to. I'm not talking about walking up to them and just basically giving them a piece of your mind. That's not what Ehwaz is about. It's about clear, honest, and open, and, friendly, cherished communication. Not about violent, at least the upright Ehwaz isn't, because we're getting to that part. So, Ehwaz may lastly also, for example, be an indication that if you are inquiring about someone that you have just met, that Ehwaz can indicate here, as for example the challenge rune, that this person is trustworthy. So if Ehwaz is upright and you are inquiring about a person and you are wondering if you can trust him, and Ehwaz is present, and runes such as converse or reverse Anzus are not present, that's something to keep in mind. Because that usually indicates trickery, that usually indicates dishonesty. Runes such as Converse Wunyo, for example, Converse Isa, runes like that, if those runes are not present, then this person is likely a trustworthy individual. Because Converse Isa deals with smiles masking hidden, usually malicious, evil intentions. Converse Wunyo indicates dishonesty. Again, Converse and reverse Anzus do in some way, shape, or form as well. So again, that's something to keep in mind. Pay attention always when you do a rune reading to the surrounding runes and the general feel and context of the rune reading that you do. And as always, the runes tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. So I have had people, they got one rune reading and they were like, oh, that's so in my face. And I was like, yeah, sorry, it's just how these things work. They don't mince words, which is, they don't, they don't exude rudeness to me, but they exude a very blatant, straightforward honesty, in the sense that this is what you need to address, this is what you need to stop doing, and this is what will most likely happen if you pass that trial, if you pass that challenge. because that to me is the value of divination. There is an internal aspect that you work on, which we will discuss more in manas, of course, and there's also very much an outer aspect of influences beyond your control, which is where perfro and manas and all that kind of stuff comes in as well. So, I mean, yeah, the runes are not for everyone. I've noticed. Some people prefer the softness of oracle cards, or the more mystical tarot cards. If you understand what I mean, I'm not quite sure how to convey how I view them. The tarot cards are to me always a little bit more esoteric in their meanings. The runes are pretty straightforward once you understand what they're saying, which is what I appreciate about them, because I tend to be a very straightforward person. I don't like to, mince words, or be dishonest or not open about who I am or what I want, or stuff like that, and that takes some people aback. And I'm not saying that I'm going out of my way to be rude, not at all, but my straightforwardness sometimes intimidates people. But I'm also of a mind that I want to be, I want to be spoken to like how I prefer to speak to people, or the other way around, depending on how you look at it. So, that is something that I very much appreciate about the runes. They are very, very open, very honest. Ehwaz upright, an example of that. So an example of Ehwaz upright appearing in a reading would be that, say that things have become a little stale and bogged down in your marriage. All right. So in this case, you may want to consult the runes and ask for advice and guidance on how to improve your marriage. So in this case, if the issue is communication between the two of you, which it 9 times out of 10 probably is, Ehwaz may show up as the challenge. And this may be an indication that you and your partner very simply just need to communicate better with each other on many things. And I am very well aware that there are often other factors like stress and money issues and kids and all that stuff, involved, of course. But, basically, communication is very much key. And showing affection, of course, which is also a form of communication, actually. Because communication is not just the words that you speak. It is also the body language that you use. It is also the the affection you show your partner. How many times are you having sex? Are you open to having intercourse? Are you open to sitting down for a romantic dinner, if that's your thing? Even if that's not your thing, if your partner really likes it, make some compromises, because again, that's what Ehwaz is also about, of course. You sit down and do things that the other person likes for a change as well. It shouldn't always be about me, and neglecting the other person. So these are all things that Ehwaz is basically saying in this kind of situation. Have talks, have discussions, negotiations, but also definitely don't neglect the alone time. I often hear this from couples who have kids, where they, don't have time for sex anymore, where they don't have time for intimacy, for, going to a restaurant together and leaving the kids at grandma, or like with a babysitter or something like that. Stuff takes maintenance. Stuff takes time to, to uphold, to facilitate, to make sure that things are flowing evenly and nicely and smoothly. And this is unfortunately so often the primary thing and the first thing that gets forgotten in the hustle and bustle of daily activity, of course. So Ehwaz, in a spiritual sense, upright. In my view, Ehwaz is very much about our communication with our higher selves and with the spiritual realms. Now, of course, that is something I personally pretty much daily engage in, because it's kind of part of my job description. But there is a need in every person's life for healthy spirituality, and I think that is so often lacking. And I don't really care how that spirituality expresses itself. Of course, I am, as you know, if you have watched my channel for a while, if you've browsed through my videos, not a huge fan of the Abrahamic traditions for various reasons. But yeah, overall, I don't care much what form that communication takes. And part of the reason I say that is because the Abrahamic religions cut you off from your own divinity. It isn't that there is a lack of communication with your deity, which is something that, is very much present in, many Christian traditions, Muslim traditions, Judaistic traditions, I suppose. But there is a distinct lack with a communication with your own higher self, with your own divine being, because that is very much discouraged in the Abrahamic traditions. You are a lowly, sinful mortal that has one life and then goes to heaven, hell, depending on the tradition and the particular denomination of that particular Abrahamic religion, of course. But you get my point. There are so many ways in which you can communicate with your higher self, whether that is through meditation, spirit journeying, how some people, yeah, anyway, I'm going to leave that out because, reasons. But, there are so many ways to connect with that, magical practices, mystical systems, I suppose. And I mean, in many ways, I found the Elder Futhark. I mean, it's quite funny to me because I started out the Elder Futhark Divination, Rune Divination 101 series as I'm discussing the runes, I'm going to go over them briefly, I'm going to learn about them. But then gradually it just became it became obvious to me that what I was doing, it wasn't just me making videos, it was just me slowly being drawn into the Futhark and being an initiate, as it were. Being a, well, up-and-coming rune master who was just being drawn into his shamanic path. And it started out literally just with the idea of, hey, you know what, somebody told me you're gonna have to sacrifice to the runes. A friend of mine told me that. She was working with the runes already, the Elder Futhark. This started, of course, with her really saying that I needed to sacrifice because otherwise they will take anyway. And I'm not quite sure if she realized just how true that is. But yeah, so I decided, hey, listen, my part of my payment, because I was at that time, of course, not aware of that contract I had with the garrison, that particular imp that was my quote-unquote familiar. But slowly I'm just drawn through these runes, and it's just becoming clearer. By the time of I think Gabo or Wunyo, it kind of started to dawn on me that what I was doing wasn't really just making videos to be informative and helpful to people on the internet and to learn about these videos myself as a sort of self-motivational, self-teaching. It was, yeah, it's kind of difficult to describe. I mean, there was this transition, and I just hit Gabo or Wunyo. I can't quite recall which one it was. I think it was Wunyo, but in Gabo, I was kind of already going like, maybe there's more to this than just what I'm doing. And sure enough, there was, and that just became so clear. So here I kind of see my weird was already in a lot of ways established by my, 500-year earlier incarnation, who kind of set out that path. And I kind of see my soul's influence, because basically I am my soul. My soul is me, but my soul is at the same time also overseeing this, as it were. It's very difficult to describe. I am definitely in control of what I'm doing, but I do see that across lifetimes my soul has done stuff which has led me to a particular culmination in this life where I finally am being initiated into these runes. And yeah, I don't know. It's a very very interesting thing to think about. And in order to fully understand that, you have to have that communication with your higher self, which for a while, again, was very difficult for me to do because I couldn't fully access my third eye for various reasons. So, yeah, it's very funny. There is a certain kind of, um, yeah. See, this is where a lot of New Agers would call that this is fate or destiny. I personally do not look at it that way. I look at it being my own architect across lifetimes. This is the weird and the orlog that I am following, the cause and effect, and my own personal strands of fate that I am weaving and that others around me are weaving. But I do see my own soul's guidance in this. There are certain things like it's kind of crazy the amount of communication that happens on a higher level. This guy, this nobleman, 500 years ago, establishes a contract. It really fucks up all the consecutive lives that I've had since then. It has fucked up this life to a degree, but this life was the one to say there's got to be more to it than just the physical. There's got to be more to it than just the mental. And I decided to delve into that, and I have very much been rewarded with my efforts on that. So it's very very interesting because not only did it have negative stuff, I am getting access to uh, energies that are, you know, beyond the gods. That's what the runes are, of course. They're the universal energies. So I mean, Odin had to sacrifice for it even, and that should tell you something. He's the highest god currently in the Germanic slash Norse pantheon, or Wodan as we call him in Dutch. But yeah, Odin is usually just the term I use because everybody knows who you're talking about when you're talking about Odin, of course. So yeah, it's quite funny that my soul seemingly just went the route of, hey, listen, I want access to this stuff. I know I gotta pay for it. It's gonna suck for a while, and for a while being 500 years, but yeah, I guess I get to be the lucky one to, finally end it all, and yeah, it's very interesting because you have all these past life regressions and these journeys and meditations, and I had no idea what I was even seeing at the time. I'm reading all these spirit contracts, and yeah, it's wow, it's crazy. So you can't really understand everything that's happening unless you have that communication with your higher self, because there are all these events that transpire over lifetimes that may seem very random, and that in some places I have felt, why the fuck did this guy do this? Was he really stupid or something? And yeah, there were things that he negotiated in that contract, that guy, which at the time in the early 1500s, I mean, yeah, people didn't know that your cognitive space and that your brain was, responsible for a lot of mental illnesses, and if they are affected negatively, that they cause mental illnesses and stuff like that. They didn't have the intricacies, the insight into how all this stuff functions on an energetic and neurological level, and all these electrical impulses that travel between your synapses and your neurons, and that are firing and stuff like that, which is all stuff that I'm learning as I'm studying psychology, of course. But I mean, everything is energy. So if a spirit who is energy lodges himself in your brain, and that spirit starts putting out negative energy and corrupting shit, yeah, you're going to get mental illness. It's just that simple, because that negative energy is affecting the energy that you are, because you are made up of energy as well. So yeah, it's in essence a sort of possession. That's what it is. It's like an oppression possession, as they call it in the Catholic Church. But I do kind of stick to those terms because people understand what you're talking about. But yeah, so that's a lot of interconnectivity, and even there we see a kind of communication pattern going on. And if it seems I'm rambling, it may seem that way, but I'm not, because I'm, you know, seeing all these connected things and all these connected points that were not clear to me then, but they're clear to me now. They are very strongly interconnected. All these things are very strongly interconnected on a level that initially, without that access to our higher selves, we just don't understand. Now, it's funny to me that I was told by someone that I had to let go of pride if I wanted to be free of the crown of insanity. Pride. I wanted access to power, because why do you want to have access to the Elder Futhark? Because you want to harness the universal energies, and yes, you have to pay the price for that, because there are guardians that are guarding that knowledge. I have paid that price, and would I do it again in hindsight? Yeah, I would. Yes, I would. Absolutely would. I, in hindsight, now that I ended that contract and I'm mopping up the damage, I'm not entirely sure if I will ever 100% heal in this lifetime. I don't know. But I have access to stuff that I think was well worth it. And I don't think I would want to do it any differently. And in this, I kind of see that the soul reincarnates in every lifetime with similar traits. I think that we all have a right to access our divinity. I think we all have a right to, as long as we handle it ethically, to gain access to power, to gain access to certain energies, to improve ourselves, to empower ourselves. I don't think that there is anything inherently wrong with that. I think, in fact, that the divine creator, the source itself, it doesn't disapprove of this at all. It doesn't approve of it either, quite frankly. I don't think that it has a opinion on your personal actions in such a manner like a Christian would think of Yahweh as having on their actions. I don't believe in the divine creator, the supreme being, being that judgmental, because it already has to encompass everything in itself in order for it to exist. Because that first cause, that supreme being, it's, yeah, it is everything. It has to be everything in order for it to exist. But that does not mean that we cannot create something else, because we are miniature versions of it. I very strongly believe that each individual soul is a splinter, a fragment of that being. And this is why I kind of call myself a, monotheistic, pantheistic pagan, because I work with the more local gods. I do think that everything is God. That's where the pantheistic part comes in. But I also think that there is one supreme being, which is the divine creator. And that's why I say monotheistic. But I also very strongly work with, very much believe in the pagan deities, obviously. But I by no means believe that Odin created the universe. I absolutely don't. I think Odin was a creation as well. I think that maybe, it's a theory I have, Odin may have been human at one point. I don't know. Odin may have just been a human who eventually, somewhere early on in human history, ascended and became, something greater than he was. So, and why else would you, seek the power of all these arcane symbols and occult symbols? And do I want to use them to help people? Absolutely, I do. But I have had people who literally attacked friends I have for my views. How very hypocritical. How very hypocritical. You're attacking me to keep me from something I've quite frankly worked for and earned through suffering. And it's quite frankly arrogant to think that way about something. Who are you to dictate to me what I can and cannot access if I am prepared to work for it? And I have over the past 500 years, including in this life. So it's, to me, if you are someone who pursues this kind of thing, if you pursue this kind of you know, occult knowledge, this metaphysical knowledge, by all means go for it. But please be aware, you have to pay a price somehow, some way, shape, or form. It is just what it is, because those who already have access to the knowledge, they are not going to give it up for free. And I understand why, because it's dangerous. Somebody, you know, needs to be willing to go through the initiation. And even though I ended the contract because I no longer have need of the assistance of the imp, and quite frankly, because the mental pressure was immense. Like I said, I wanted to kill myself for 10 years straight. But yeah, it's in hindsight, I can safely say I have endured it. I mean, I still need to finish the Futhark, obviously, to call myself a rune master. So, I mean, I'm assuming that I will receive word when that happens. But yeah, so this communication aspect is a very important thing. It is a you know, it is the impulses and the hints that we receive from our higher selves, from our own souls, because uh, this is where I actually feel that the New Age movement, with all its talk about spirit guides and soulmates and twin flames, and it's so toxic, it's so harmful, because it dictates you that you are a, just like the Christians, just like all the other Abrahamic religions, it teaches you that you are at the whim of gods. It teaches you that you are a puppet that is being led through life by all these guides, which, by the way, I have no problem with guides. Let me get that out of the way first, actually. I know some of my guides. I consider the fetch that I talked about earlier a guide who is currently not able to execute her role properly, which is not her fault. And I don't blame her for it. I'm actually, you know, again, getting help for her because I want her to, you know, be able to, you know, be of sound mind, and also I want her to be able to assist me. But because her corruption affects me mentally as well, so there is that interconnectivity again. But you know, I mean, I like my guides, the ones that I know. They're not all corrupted, obviously. That's kind of silly to think, but um, I wouldn't have gotten this far if all of them were, you know, corrupted, because I have seen some really wonky shit that happened in my benefit, to my benefit, after a very, very dark period of my life. So, you know, but I don't think that they're there influencing my life in such a way that takes away my free will. I think that sometimes they make little things happen. I think that most of the time they don't do anything, and they are literally just there to guide you if you want to have information. And again, it is possible for your guides to be corrupted. It is possible that you are cut off from your guides. It is possible, like I was, my third eye was blocked. I couldn't properly receive communication. When I asked cards, I got really strange answers. Why did I get strange answers? A, my fetch was corrupted. B, uh, I couldn't talk to them properly because my third eye was blocked. And C, that familiar, that imp, was in essence a guide for the duration of the contract. And that guy, he was fucking insane. He wanted me to have negative things happen to me. So I listened to stupid things that were told by cards and runes and stuff. But I was receiving guidance from a guide that did not have my best interest at heart. So people think that if they do divination, that they're going to get the answers. But you're not. You first need to actually learn to connect properly if you are capable, or seek help if you can't, from outside, in order to access those abilities, which may or may not be blocked for you. I have no way of knowing that right now without knowing you. I have no way of, you know, talking to you, the viewer, and tell you exactly right now, right here, what's wrong with you personally. But you know, there is of course individual factors. Like each individual, it's spiritual illnesses, as I'll call them for the sake of comfort, they are much more personalized than a physical illness is. Because keep in mind, I'm not denying the existence of physical illnesses like bacteria and viruses and stuff like that. Of course, these things exist, but for mental illnesses, oftentimes that does very much start in the spiritual. It is very much something that can be helped and or hindered by spirits, by contracts, by things you may have done in past lives. It may even not be your fault. It may be a familial curse, something I've had to deal with too. I come from a bloodline which had 3 different curses on it, and I had to strip them away. So, these are so that at least my kids who come from my loins won't have that curse. And I am looking into manners in which to strip it from my entire family, but that may take a while. So, these are things that are, they can culminate and boil over into some form of really fucked up stuff that's happening to you, or even internally. It can be outwardly or internally, and it is so important, actually, if you want to engage in all this metaphysical work, that you first do all that internal work, that you clear stuff out, that you, I mean, I had a pretty damn heavy initiation. I mean, I had my illness technically from the age of 14, and I'm in my very late 20s now. So, I mean, I went through quite a lot of, but it became really bad when I was 18. So it's been a little over a decade now. Yeah, no, it's pretty. It's been pretty rough, but really, what I needed to do was first seek help outside, have my inability to access properly my my own higher self, to have that stripped away, and what was hindering that stripped away, I mean. And then I was able to more fully access my own higher selves and higher cognizance, in order to truly understand how all these things were interconnected. So it's been a little bit of a ride. So I mean, all this meditation that we do, the information we receive through spiritual journeys, other forms of interaction such as through divination, it's all about communication, whether that is with other spirits, whether that is with our higher selves, whether that is with other practitioners of the metaphysical, whether that is in so many different areas of life. It is about trust. It is about knowing who to trust, who not to trust. It very strongly is related to Ansus, the divine inspiration. The words that flow through the energy that we are receiving. But Ehwaz, rather than it being the actual information we receive, it is the representation of the means through which we receive it, the line of communication. In other words, Ehwaz is our Sleipnir. It is the horse on which we ride through all the worlds, through all the realms, through all the all the worlds, all the 9 worlds, for whatever your tradition dictates. By the way, I don't strictly believe in the 9 worlds. I do, however, believe that there are 9 different planes, which we in the Germanic tradition intimately work with. But that is something, by the way, oftentimes when you hear talk about shamanism, whatever that is, and shamans, you always hear that there are like 3 worlds. There's like the lower world, the mid world, and the upper world. This is another thing that I really want to address in a video, because I've heard so many people say stuff like, "Oh, white people can't be shamans," and blah blah blah, and it's so stupid. But I want to really address that. From my personal experiences and viewpoints. I mean, there are a couple of other channels here what's his name? Thunder Wizard, for example, who talks about Teutonic shamanism and shamanism for white people, stuff like that. Make no mistake, people. We as Caucasians may have lost our connection, and this is why I want to include this here, because it's that connection, that interconnectiveness. As Europeans, we have very strongly lost our connection to our ancestors. We have very strongly lost our connection to our pagan ways, to our shamanic ways, to our connections to the spirits of the nine worlds, to all these powers and these gods that still walk this earth. I mean, we hear so much talk about other cultures, the Native Americans and their shamans, or well, shamans. I mean, they didn't even call them shamans, but for some reason, when people think of the word shaman, they think of the Native Americans a lot, when really shaman is a term that is originated in Asia. So really, technically, if you want to be that strict about things, the only peoples that could call themselves shamans would be people in that general area. But again, more information on that in a different specific video, which somebody else requested a long time ago. I still haven't forgotten about it. It's just I haven't come around to making it. But we have lost, to get back to where I was going with this, we have lost that connection. And to the point where I have heard people say that white people can't be shamans, that we do not have that connection anymore. And this is partially true. We as a branch of humanity, to say it, as a offshoot of the human race, we have lost things. And I do partially blame that very much on the Abrahamic religions, Christianity in particular. It has violated our spirits, our souls, to the point where we are cut off from what we once knew to be true, to the beings and the elder kin, the gods that we once very strongly connected to. All the way back when Odin was still called Vodanaz, it's something that we need to retrieve, in my opinion. It is something that we very strongly need to empower ourselves with. We, in my personal opinion, need to do away with all this Christian stuff, all this filthy, tainted spirituality that has caused us to be subjugated and to subjugate others in return, because it's a very imbalanced dynamic that Yahweh has with us. It is a very toxic religion that says that we are way below him, whereas our old gods, they say walk with us, not below us, behind us, or beneath us. And that is, of course, what Odin is. He is very much a empowerer. He's very much a being who spreads wisdom, who seeks wisdom, not just for wisdom itself, but to share with people. And this is something that we, as people who walk the shamanic path, we try to emulate Odin in this, because Odin is, after all is said and done, very much a shamanistic god. He is a acquirer of knowledge and wisdom, and he seeks to connect with all the realms and to find answers and ways to stave off what is seemingly inevitable, Ragnarok, of course. And in this we also try to work with the runes and all these other symbols, with our ancestors, with all these all the things and the wisdom and the knowledge that those before us have built up. That's why we honor our ancestors, of course, because we now know that DNA actually stores information. So the knowledge that you gain, you pass on to your kids or to your offspring, even if it may lay dormant for a generation or multiple generations even. And these are all things that are also interconnected. Our messages, our communications, what our ancestors have, and what they have acquired is also passed on. And so, what we learn about the gods, what we learn about our own divinity, about our own selves, this too, gets passed on to our offspring. And this is why I think it is so very important that we start learning not from sources that are written down, because the old Germanic tribes, they did not have writings. Again, the Eddas were recorded in Iceland, in Christian Iceland. And, I read recently an article that also true, of course, the Norse heathenry, paganism, what you want to call it. I personally don't call myself also true, as I've talked about before, for various reasons. But and that's not to say I look down upon it, by the way. Don't think that at all. But I found it very entertaining and positive and amusing, actually, to read about that there was a temple to the Aesir and Vanir, and all the gods opened there, and that was actually a beautiful thing to read, and it's something that needs to be rediscovered. And I would actually very strongly suggest that people stop being so anal about what was written. I really think people should talk to spirits, to talk to the gods, and develop your own personal relations with them. And a lot of people, they talk in the manner like, oh yeah, the gods are to be feared, and getting the attention of the gods is not a good thing. And I frankly disagree. Yeah, you're gonna have to pay prices. A gift for a gift. That is the 7th rune in the Elder Futhark. It is a very early lesson. A gift requires a gift. Yes, this is true. But the gods aren't evil. The gods are not out to fuck you over. I've never found this. It's not the gods that are fucking you over. If you are asking for something, you are gonna get it. But you're also gonna have to give things in return, and that's why I am, in hindsight, okay with having suffered for the right of calling myself a rune master soon, because yeah, it's something that needs to be earned. It's something that needs to be given something in return for. And in this case, I did not directly learn from the Aesir and or Vanir or the Jotun even, or the Alvar or the Dvergar or the Whites, or whatever. It just doesn't really matter to me how I came by the information. I was taught these things, and I have learned them, and I can pass them on, not only to my maybe next incarnation, to my spirit, to my soul, uh, because make no mistake, that knowledge is retained in your higher self. Once you learn things, you will have that that access to these things in next lives, in other incarnations, if you want to incarnate after this life. So I guess why I'm saying all this, and even if I'm appearing to be all over the place, it's very much about communication. It's about retaining of information. And here we see Ansus come into effect, the rune of Odin. Uh, it's quite funny, because Odin, Ansus, writing Ehwaz, Sleipnir. Odin is writing Sleipnir, and he's gaining knowledge and relaying that knowledge swiftly. So, it's a very interesting concept to me that, for example, we pass things on through our DNA, and everything is so very connected. So, I guess what I'm saying with all this in relation to the old shamanic practices, we may not have writings of them, but we need to start making our own writings. And that's why I partially continue these videos, even after I realized that, you know, that I wasn't just making educational videos for both myself and then uploading them to motivate myself to make sure that my information was accurate and powerful and stuff like that, but it is also to relay this kind of information that I've learned and that I've experienced and that I've dealt with as a sort of caution to people who are considering initiating themselves. Are you sure you want to go through with this? A, and B, this is what you're going to get back for it in return. Not only self-empowerment, but also access to very, very powerful ancient symbols. And I'm not going to lie, I have reason to suspect that the current systems out there, the Anglo-Saxon Futhark, or the Anglo-Frisian Futhark, sometimes also known as, the younger or Scandinavian Futhark, the Elder Futhark, and even the Armanen Futhark, or the Armanen runes, I believe they're called, not the Futhark, the Armanen runes, that these four symbols, these four sets, these four systems, I don't think they're the only runes out there. I think there are runes out there that are undiscovered. But that is a personal hypothesis that I have, and I would love to, you know, try and find this. But if the myths are anything to go by, discovering that is quite a significant, huge prize, as Odin has already demonstrated. But it is something we need to rediscover. Something we very much need to rediscover within ourselves if we want to. Yeah, I think the concept of white guilt is overdone. We need to do away with it. We need to make peace with our past, and we very strongly need to understand that we as white people have very much a shamanic history. We very much have a connection to the spirit realm, and if you as a white person consider yourself a shaman or a shamanic initiate, and you want to pursue that path, if you feel a calling to that, please do so. We need more of you, because we need to rebuild that stuff. We need to rebuild that heritage. We need to communicate that there really is a heritage, an inheritance that our very distant ancestors have left us that we have forgotten, that needs to be retrieved, that needs to be honored, and that needs to be built further upon. And I think you will find that Ehwaz, once you meditate on it, once you communicate with it, that knowledge will find you swiftly. So that is something that I kind of wanted to leave here as a spiritual interpretation of this rune for me personally, and for what I think regarding the state of our spiritual state. Well, yeah, of our spiritual state as. And by the way, I am talking about white people because it just so happened to be something that recently came to my attention, that there were some people who look down upon white people, calling themselves shamans and stuff like that. And I didn't choose to call myself a shaman. I was called a shaman by someone else who recognized that I was with spirits, as they say. So it was not something that I knew about or even understood before somebody else told me this. And in my personal case, I just happened to be so desperate for a cure that I went out and pursued it. And many setbacks and many years later, I'm finally at the point where I can safely say I've made some very significant progress. I keep switching those two words up, I don't know why. But anyway. We now come to Ehwaz converse in divination. So Ehwaz in converse may indicate that something may appear to be slow moving or not slow moving at all, but behind the scenes there may be forces at work that will cause things to move suddenly and and may cause things to appear out in the open. So something that may have appeared to not move will soon reveal itself, and it may start moving. So what that means, for example, is that if there is a situation that you are wanting to move, that you are wanting to hope that you are wanting or hoping for it to move out of a stasis, that this will soon happen, but that you just need to be patient a little while longer, because stuff is already working behind the scenes, and whatever that stuff is depends on the situation, but it's working behind the scenes to get things moving. So whether this is for good or ill depends on the feeling and interpretation that one gets from the from the situation, from the rune, from the reading as a whole, from the spread, where in the reading the rune appears, the context of the question. As always, these things need to be taken into consideration when it comes to divination, of course. It may also be the case that, excuse me, it may also be the case that someone is putting up a front and abusing the trust that you are putting in them when one is dealing with Ehwaz's interpersonal meanings and interpretations when it comes to divination. So someone may, for example, be considered a friend by you, but they may be gossiping behind your back, or they may seek to plot your downfall in some way, shape, or form. This will most likely be something that happens from within your internal sphere of friends, the social structure that you have built around yourself. So it can possibly indicate, therefore, cheating within a monogamous marriage, for example, the betrayal committed by a friend, stuff like that. Again, list is not exhaustive, as always. List is open to having further meanings, and that is up to you to figure that out. So, Ehwaz converse, in an example, you have suspicions regarding a person who you have considered to be a good friend for a while. They may be spreading lies about you. They may be gossiping about you. In this case, when casting the runes, Ehwaz may appear in converse in the present or challenge slot in order to indicate and signify that this betrayal is happening. Now, of course, prudence and care must be taken to make sure that you are reading the runes right and that you're not attributing a false meaning to something that is actually dealing with something else. Always trust your intuition, but do also take into consideration the other factors. Is this reasonable to assume this, or could this mean this rune mean something else in this case? That is a little more reasonable given the context of the question that I asked, given the overall feeling of the spread, and given the overall feeling I get from the situation as a whole. And again, divination can be a little bit risky business, especially when you are personally involved, because you're inclined to see stuff that may not necessarily be there. So, watch out for that with these kinds of interpretations, as always. You don't want to randomly start accusing your friends or being suspicious towards them, because that may not even be a valid, thing to accuse them of in the first place. And that way you are going to break friendships when, there might not have been a need for that. So do please be careful with that. So Ehwaz, in a spiritual meaning, when it's in converse, it's very much to me is about misdirected confidence and gifts misdirected for harmful gain, in my understanding of it. People are not to be used and discarded after their usefulness has expired. You got to remain humble, true to your kin, to your friends, to all those that come to establish a true bond of friendship and trust with you, or even like a romantic relationship with you. You in return have to honor them in the same way that they honor you and that they respect you and trust you. It is, as Ehwaz very clearly demonstrates, a two-way street. So this is something that Ehwaz in converse to me indicates that there is a lack of such trust, a lack of such you know, a lack of such a commitment or bond, and that there is some maybe even maliciousness involved regarding uh, a relationship. And this is something that you obviously should be careful of. It's not something that is healthy or conducive to a relationship in any way, shape, or form. Um, you know, cheating out of lust, for example, or because you are unwilling to work for your relationship in order to see it prosper, willfully not paying back a friend who borrowed you money or who did a lot for you. So you're not, you know, repaying a friend in a manner that befits what they have done for you. Again, Gable, gift for a gift. You know, these are all examples of abusing the trust and love of other people, the merciless exploitation of other people. Um, and there is a video I have planned on vampirism. Um, Not everybody who is a energetic vampire is a bad person, but I happen to have very personal experiences with one who is. So so I have a very, you know, personal experience with somebody who was supposed to be there for me, but I will discuss that in that particular video. Who kind of abused that trust and that, you know, uh, gift of energetic bondage, or not bondage, uh, bonding, I should say, yes. That gift of energetic bonding that they possess in that vampiric sense, they have, whether knowingly or unknowingly, I am not even sure, they have abused that. So, yeah, I will discuss that a little bit more in the vampirism video. Um, and this may seem like a, if you're not familiar with the you know, with the concept of psychic vampirism, you may, this may be something you may want to like look up or research a little further into, because I personally am currently studying that for this video, because it's well, very fascinating, and I didn't know that much about it. But again, I was asked to make a video on this, so I am. Uh, but yeah, yes, no, you know, do give that video a look as well. Give that video a watch as well. If you want to know more about why I say what I'm saying in the context of abusing communications and energetic bonds between people, because this is actually a very relevant topic to this particular rune, but I also need material for that particular video, so I am leaving this out and only giving it a brief mention in passing for the purpose of this particular video. So, you know, if you are going out of your way to hurt, damage, or even sever the connection of a friendship and trust, that is the kind of energy that is, you know, harnessed and symbolized by converse Ehwaz. It is a misuse of communicative energies, as it were. So, you know, if you wish to keep and gain a good reputation, of course, this is not the type of action that you want to be performing or engaging in. You know, this is not the kind of person you want to be. I mean, if you want to be that kind of person, I don't know why you would want to be, because it's in the end just going to come back and bite you in the ass. But hey, you know, so where Ehwaz upright is, you know, timely action, wise action. Reverse Ehwaz is about ill-timed action, unwise actions. Ehwaz is about misdirected action, and this can or cannot be. This can be intentional to disrupt the actions of others. So you're being deceptive, deceiving, stuff like that. This is Ehwaz in converse. But it can also be action that you are thinking is right, but is not actually right, because you were too blind to the obvious truth, or perhaps not so obvious truth. But you made a move. It is very stupid. You didn't think about it properly, or you did think about it, but somehow, some way, somewhere along the road, you kind of got lost. So that is what converse Ehwaz is in a spiritual context to me. It is the misdirection, misapplication, or even the misuse of communicative energies and bonds and friendships, and using other people, whether willingly or unknowingly, uh, for your own personal gain without honoring the essence of Gabo, a gift for a gift, and mutual respect and communication. So lastly, we come to Ehwaz in reverse, and of course we are going to discuss the general meaning in divination. Ehwaz in reverse indicates that there is a blockage in regards to attaining your goal or goals. Movement is stifled, outright blocked, and may even be downright prevented by something or someone at times, or at this time in particular, at the time in question that you are inquiring about. This may be for a variety of reasons, but the most likely is that you yourself are engaging in ill-timed behavior that is ultimately unwise, at least at this point in time. So it may be action that is way too fast, way too speedy. It may be action that is happening way too late. Um, stuff like that. So when Ehwaz in reverse shows up, you may want to reconsider your approach to a given situation or even a person by analyzing what is working with them or what is working in the situation and what is not. It may also be an indication that you are not relying on the support and help of friends and or other loved ones, family members, acquaintances that you know that you could receive help from, or maybe you're like too prideful to ask for help. Maybe you're too ashamed to ask for help, but you really need to. For example, you're dealing with an addiction or something and you just need some outside help, some interference to get over it, because you have kind of at this point in time proven that you yourself can't do it. Which, there's no shame in that. Addictions are there to be overcome, as they say. I have dealt with them. I speak from experience. But, it's something that's a nasty thing. And that's an example of how reverse Ehwaz may be showing up in divination. So, sometimes we are simply trying to do things that we ourselves can't do alone. It is not weakness. It is merely the way the world works. And this is where the energy of Ehwaz comes into play. I have had to find this out the very hard way, not just with addictions, but in my spiritual work to which I'm called, with the blockage of my third eye. I mean, what use is a spiritual worker if they can't properly all the time access their third eye when they are engaging in spiritual work? So, it is it's very much something that your pride should not get in the way of, because Ehwaz is about friendships, it's about partnerships, it's about relationships. So Ehwaz in reverse may be a call to honor your commitments that you may have neglected and or outright forsaken even. In some cases, Ehwaz may be an indication that you are slipping back into old patterns, habits, and for the worse in this case. Think, for example, about an addiction, like I mentioned, being reignited by new traumatic events that bring back certain cravings or memories, or certain coping mechanisms that maybe the situation is so stressful that you are wanting to go back to the addiction, even though you have been clean for years at this point. Um, it may be about a lack or loss of energy or effort or will, in which case steps must be taken, of course, to turn that around and regain your footing, regain your bearing, regain your motivation, your frame of mind, stuff like that. So at its worst, Ehwaz in reverse may draw its attention to your inner psyche and the fact that you yourself internally are entirely lost, bemused, bogged down in something that is preventing any sort of movement forward, or that it may refer to an individual who is an enemy and outright poses opposition towards your goals. So that is another thing that you may want to consider. Ehwaz reverse, an example. Suppose that you are having difficulties again in a romantic relationship and communication is faltering between the two of you. So in this case, you may be inclined to pull even further away to make your displeasure known. Give them the silent treatment. However, if you do not talk your issues out and you expect your spouse to come to you, you will never have a resolution, or at least not a satisfactory resolution. It is also, quite frankly, very unfair to the other party. Um, because if you have a grievance, Ehwaz is calling to you to, speak out about it, to do so in a objective, calm, collected, and preferably friendly manner. But if Ehwaz reversed is in the present or challenge slot, in the present or challenge slot for this particular question, you may want to reconsider your actions, as you are not doing what you should be doing at this point in time. And needless to say, is your partner most likely, but someone has to be the one to step up. So it might as well be you. Ehwaz reverse, a spiritual meaning, my personal interpretation. That is the last thing we're going to be discussing for this video. So Ehwaz in reverse to me in a spiritual sense is the stagnation of our learning process regarding the things we can learn from our interactions with other human beings. It is a bitterness or isolation that we have sought out of hurt or pain in order to avoid being hurt or damaged again. In reality, what we are doing is harming ourselves further, of course, by withdrawing and isolating ourselves, and by not letting that energy that we need, whether that be friendship or love or social interaction in general, we need these things. Human beings, even if you are an introvert, I am very much an introvert. But even I do need social interaction from time to time. So, we are social creatures. It's in our nature. So we do need certain things to fulfill us, like romantic love, sex, for the vast majority of people. We do need hugs and cuddles and kisses and embraces and sharing affection with people, and we need friends to hang out with. We need friends to talk about our interests with, to share our love for something. Even engaging in activities and hobbies is in some way, shape, or form interacting with content that other people have created. So, we should very much take care not to hide away or to shut off pieces of ourselves. Why? Because this could have very profound implications on your aura. It could have implications on your chakras, on your mental, spiritual, and even your physical well-being, of course. It can produce bitterness, hurt, it prevents us from gaining new experiences, which is, of course, at the end of the day, why we are here on the physical plane. If you are denying yourself that, you are denying your very soul, actually. We are supposed to adapt, to learn, to thrive, to overcome, to face challenges, and to prevail and stuff like that. So, we should take care not to go into life with a closed mind. And so that's, what Ehwaz, of course, is in reverse. It is a stagnation of movement, a breaking down of our vessel or our mode of transportation. So we are, in this spiritual context, we are refusing to move forward in life, or unable to move forward in life for whatever reason, maybe due to mechanical failure, if you will. And if that is something that you want to apply to yourself, this could be an illness, like a severe trauma, or a physical illness, a mental illness, a spiritual illness, as we have discussed. So these are all things that can come into play for why we are not moving on the path of life in the way we should and or want. And this is, of course, a very tragic and sad thing, because it's not healthy for anybody to be in that kind of situation. And yeah, it is possible that we find ourselves in such a position, very much so. But most things can, of course, be overcome. And it is for this reason that I'm saying, try to keep an open heart. And that often takes work, of course. It's not as easily done as it is said. And I very much speak from experience. Like I said, I was housebound for several years. I was cripplingly depressed with all sorts of mental issues that I couldn't handle at the time, quite frankly. And even several years of therapy, it did help me, but it didn't help me to the point where I could finally function. That's how severe it was. It was literally only through working through the runes that I started finding my liberation in this sense. I literally have had people who did not want to see me progress with the runes. I've had them try to sabotage my attempts at being initiated. And this brings me to my last topic that I wanted to talk about for the purpose of this video. Being scared of the metaphysical. It's normal. It's very much normal. Especially in our culture that we live in, our Judeo-Christian influenced culture, where everything not from Yahweh or Jehovah or whatever you want to call it is perceived to be evil and demonic. And this is not the case. In fact, I'd argue he's the demon, as you know if you have followed this channel for a while. And the reasons for which I'm saying that is right in the Bible. But my point is, the metaphysical has been made scary through sheer propaganda by a lot of people who have alternative agendas, if you ask me. One of them is Yahweh and his followers, of course, because, you should not practice divination or sorcery or necromancy, because a person like that should be put to death. Why? Because they're seeking power. They're seeking power, and the only person that's allowed to have power is Yahweh. Now, the only thing that I do also want to address outside of Abrahamic influence is, of course, that a lot of people, when they first engage with the metaphysical, whether it be through a unprotected, unprepared teenage session of the Ouija board, or some other form of communicating with spirits, of going to a graveyard and of doing your EVP sessions and recording your evidence, as it were, if you are a person who likes to do that kind of stuff. I did that too all the way in the beginning. You go to the graveyard and you record EVPs in the hopes of capturing evidence for the existence of spirits, and you're trying to gather all this evidence because you want to believe in the metaphysical, you want to believe in the paranormal, and you do all these things, all these entry point activities, as I would call them. And I, in no way, shape, or form, am trying to be, elitist or looking down upon all these activities. They absolutely have their place, and I am very well aware that the Ouija board can absolutely be used very professionally, and I kind of appreciate the people who, for the reason, if they're doing it for the reason of actually collecting evidence and they're doing it for scientific purposes, I do appreciate people who go out with technology and record responses and stuff like that. What I don't appreciate, however, is if they just go out there to try to because it's fun, and they're just trying to fucking pester spirits and prod spirits. I mean, come on, they're people too. They have feelings too. They might be dead, but they have feelings too. And yeah, it's how would you feel if there was some random jackass just walking into your house with a recorder and be like, "Oh, are you here? Are you there?" You know what I mean? It's a little disrespectful in my professional opinion, shall we say? But I mean, I get that there's a place for it, and you're doing all this stuff, and you often hear people who have a negative experience with this kind of thing, right? And they have negative communication, and they have experiences that freak them the fuck out. They get scratched and they have free scratches and ooh, scary demons. Have you ever considered the fact that maybe that these beings are just doing that because they think it's funny? Have you ever considered that they do it because they know that you are raised in a Judeo-Christian background and that they know that you're going to interpret those free scratches as, ooh, that's a mocking of the Trinity, and you're going to run right back to Yahweh, and you're going to remain disempowered. Because that is what a lot of negative entities and beings want. A lot of spirits want. They want you to remain disempowered. And they want you to remain indebted to them with contracts and all these kinds of things. They don't want you to strip away the energetic spiritual contracts that may be holding you back, because you are paying them on some way, shape, or form, usually with energy, sometimes with very specific energy too. You know, one demon may be, as I call a demon, like as in a, you know, malicious entity that is out to cause you harm, as I have discussed before. That is my definition of a demon. I'm aware that some of you left-hand path people may, you know, refer to certain old pagan gods as demons because it, yeah, resounds with you for whatever reason. But, you know, you get what I mean. When I say demon, I'm actively talking about a person that is actively out to cause harm to, you know, to people for shits and giggles, or because they do that to feed. That to me is a demon. So with that definition out of the way, I'm going to use the word demon for now. But because it's a very loaded word, so I always kind of feel the need to include the, you know, the description, the elaboration on it. But what I'm trying to say here is such entities, they want you to remain disempowered, okay? And frankly, all the theatrics that you see in exorcisms, I honestly think that the spirit's just fucking with you. That's what I think. And I think that a lot of the time when spirits actually do get removed, Yahweh is basically violating contract, because most of the time when a demon is attached to someone, in my experience, it very much is because they have a contract and they are lashing out because you are doing something which makes them feel threatened, or they may just be fucking with you. It's usually one of the two. And usually the purpose of this is, if they are lashing out, they're trying to scare you away from the metaphysical, because they know that once you engage with it, you'll gain knowledge of spiritual contracts, you'll gain knowledge of how to do magic, you'll gain knowledge of how to contact deities, you'll gain knowledge of how to make allies in the spirit world who can help you in turn with resolving these contracts, as Odin did with me. You can, you know, be fucked with just because they know that you are going to run right back to Christianity or Islam or whatever, and you're going to pray to Yahweh or Allah, and you're going to dedicate your life to him, and you're going to sit there and you're going to preach to everybody else of how bad the metaphysical is. And those entities will have exactly what they want. You now stay away from the metaphysical. You now stay away from empowering yourself. And you are now right back in a very toxic, misogynistic, disempowering religion. And you will never, ever in that lifetime return to it, because you got so scared. And this is why I say to people who usually come to me and they say, yeah, I had a real bad experience with this and that. And what you're doing, I don't know why you're doing it. You're working with demons. I'm sorry, I'm not working with demons. You are playing right into their hands. I usually don't have any problem with any sort of religion. I have no problem with Hinduism. I have no problem with Buddhism, even though I disagree with their stance on, you know, certain aspects of divinity and stuff like that. But everybody has their right to, you know, believe what they want, even the Abrahamic religions, even though I don't like them. I do respect that there are people who adhere to them and engage with them. That is the, you know, respecting of free will. But, you know, I don't care if you're a Celtic, Irish pagan, or if you're you know, Azatru, or if you're an Odinist, or you know, or if you're a follower of the Yoruba, or you practice, you know, voodoo or whatever, or Santeria, or, you know, you name it. It doesn't really matter to me. But what I do want to say is that things are a lot more complicated than that one interaction you've had, or that two interaction you've had. There is likely a reason, if you ever engaged in the metaphysical, why you had a negative reaction the first time. And this could be anything. You didn't protect yourself when you were using that Ouija board when you were 13, and you invited random spirits in by asking the very stupid question, are there any spirits here? Yes, there are dozens of spirits in your immediate vicinity. And you know what? Most of them are not going to be bothered with talking with you because they don't care. You know who is going to talk with you? Spirits who want to fuck with you. So, or spirits who desperately need help. That may be the case too. But if they're desperate enough to talk to you when you're 13 years old and you're sitting there with your group of friends, giggling and telling ghost stories, yeah, okay. Be careful who you communicate with. That is something that I find very sad when, and I used to be this way too. When I was a real young kid, the first time I ever heard a negative spirit talk to me, I was 4 years old, okay? I heard it in the house of my babysitter. I heard the spirit talk to me, and I was like, what the fuck? Well, of course, I didn't think what the fuck because I didn't speak English back then, but, you know, the point should be clear, hopefully, that initial negative communications do not speak for the whole of the spirit world, okay? There are plenty of beings who are either neutral towards you, or beings who very much like you and who want to work with and maybe even for you if you get to that point. Okay, so there are very, 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 very varied, you know, various amounts of interactions that you can have. It's usually, however, the first interaction that you have with the spirit world, especially if you have some nasty attachments, or you know, there are plenty of spirits who have ulterior motives when they interact with you. Hell, I'm actually personally of the opinion that the so-called guardian angels that Christianity provides, that they may actually be the ones to cause the negative experiences, because they want to scare you right back into going back to the Abrahamic religions. Now, I think that there is a very good backing for this. Why? I want to read you a verse. And this verse is from the Old Testament. I have quoted it before at the beginning of one of my Excarnating the Lamb videos. But it is a verse that I often have used when people tell me that I am wrong on this. But I know from experience I'm not, because I had a guardian angel who actively hindered my efforts into delving into the metaphysical. And that guardian angel is finally gone after I did my unbaptism and my denunciation. And then my unbaptism, excuse me. So this verse comes from the Old Testament, like I said, and it is in the book 1 Samuel, or 1 Samuel. And no, I'm not going all preachy with you. I am definitely reading this for a non-Abrahamic reason. So let's see here. Let's pull this up. 1 Samuel chapter 16, verses 14. I think it's just verse 14. Okay, I'm looking it up as I'm talking to you guys. But yeah, so verses 14 and 15. So 1 Samuel chapter 16, verses 14 and 15. So pay attention. Now, the Spirit of the Lord, and this is from the New International Version, by the way. So just go on BibleGateway.com or BibleHub.com or something, and you can read this in whatever translation you prefer. So, starting again. Now the Spirit of the Lord, Yahweh, had departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord, Yahweh, tormented him. Saul's attendants said to him, "See, an evil spirit from God, capital G, is tormenting you." It's right there. It's right there in the Bible. All right. So, yes, if you were at some point, even in a past life, baptized by Christians, you are going to have one of these spirits, or likely to have one of these spirits. In my experience, it varies. Some people don't have them because they weren't baptized in this life. Like a friend of mine doesn't have didn't have a guardian angel because she was never baptized in this life and actually already did away with that stuff in a previous life, for example. So that is possible. Now, there are several ways of cutting that off, of course, but that is not the point. Watch my Excarnating the Lamb series if you wish to know how to do that, or one way of how to do that, because I've heard reports from other people on my channel who have cut away these ties, in a different way than I prescribed, but that is, perfectly okay, however you want to do it. If it works for you, it works for you. So, so basically what I'm getting at is there are many reasons why people have negative experiences with, the first endeavors and adventures into the paranormal metaphysical. So, sometimes, yeah, it does bring unpleasantness with it. For example, the sacrifices you sometimes have to make. But theoretically, you could go through your entire life, cast magic left and right, and you could never ask another being for a favor. Or you could never, initiate yourself into specific systems. It is possible. So, you don't necessarily have to sacrifice, but if you want to really get into stuff, yeah, usually sacrifices are going to be required. Now, of course, the question is, are you prepared to do that? Now, I wouldn't, if I were you, immediately answer that question right now if you are a complete novice at something. What I would recommend is that you actually persist. And yes, if you do have negative attachments, or you have contracts that don't want you to see stuff because they keep feeding off of you and profiting off of you for whatever reason, because no, not everybody you make a contract with is benevolent. Okay, the spirit world just doesn't work like that, and quite frankly, to think any other way, it's naivety. Not everybody's nice. Some people are just shady. Some people are just here for their own benefit, and they want to screw you over. Careful who you deal with. Careful who you communicate with is the very basic lesson I want to share with you through the sharing of these experiences and stories. Because as the Bible itself says, even the self-professed Prince of Peace, Yahweh, the Lord and Savior that he sent, and all these supposed good things that he's done for mankind, it says here that Yahweh sends evil spirits at people. But God himself can't do evil. Okay. So it seems to me that the Lord Yahweh is a little bit of a liar, as I have outlined before. There are things you need to watch out for in the metaphysical, absolutely. But I would not let a couple negative experiences in the metaphysical deter me. Because in the beginning, I only had negative experiences with the metaphysical. Because there were so many different factions trying to stop me from unraveling all these contracts and these spirit attachments. Just one remains now. And I know that this is another contract which I made willingly in a past life with the being known as Moloch. So Moloch, you know, from the Bible, you know, it's a bull, a god worshipped in the, you know, surrounding areas, and even in Israel itself. I believe in Israel itself, it mentions it in the Bible that you know, people let their children pass through fire for Moloch. Whether this directly entails human sacrifice, I don't know. It may just be like a consecration rite, but that's never mentioned. So. At least not as far as I'm aware. If you do know of any Bible verses from the top of your head or through research which you know, talks about that kind of stuff, please let me know. Comment down below. I would appreciate it. But yeah, so I found that out recently. I have one more contract left. Stripped away everything, including Yahweh, including the guardian angel, including you know, the Jehovah's Witness contract I had somewhere in this life made when I got myself baptized into that stuff, which I will do another video on, by the way. Fun fact for you know, those who may be interested in learning more about that. Yes, you will get a you know, apostate speaking about it, but you know. So yeah, I actually kind of look forward to uncovering what that's all about. I do have to, you know, take care of some other stuff on a spiritual level right now, which I won't be disclosing too much about, because I have a feeling that that's going to be, yeah, topic for another Rune video or two. Communication, people. It's a very important aspect of human life, of human existence, and of our spiritual existence as well, of our mental existence, of everything and everyone around us. And yeah, Ehwaz has proven to be a very, very integrated rune for me. That I did not expect this rune to be this in depth when I was meditating on it, thinking on it, and learning about it, learning about myself through it. I guess that concludes this particular rune. The rune of Ehwaz, the rune of momentum, the rune of speed, the horse rune. Next time we will be discussing Manas, the rune of the self, the rune of humankind, which is a very, very interesting rune, and probably a rune that is, after Perfro, the rune I have understood least up until this point. So I guess we will see what that yields. All right, thank you all so much for watching. I look forward to seeing you all next time on this series and on this channel, whether that is with a different video or this series, I don't know. We will see which one I'm going to put out first. Thank you all so much for watching again. Please comment any and all you know, interesting tidbits or information or whatever you want to share, insights, personal experiences down below, and I will see you next time. Hail.